My name is Clara. I'm 31, and for my entire life, I've been the responsible daughter who built a career from nothing. For my birthday this year, all I wanted was a simple phone call, just a small sign that I finally mattered more than my golden boy brother, Ethan. The phone did ring. It was my mom, but she didn't say happy birthday. She asked, "Can you send over $500 for your brother's new watch?" $500 on my birthday. The coldness of it was a gut punch. I wasn't their daughter. I was just a wallet for my brother's next celebration. But they had no idea I was sitting on a secret $75,000 bonus. So I bought myself a house. If you've ever felt invisible in your own family, let me know where you're watching from and subscribe, because the moment they saw it on Instagram, all hell broke loose. When validation doesn't come from your family, you learn to find it somewhere else. For me, that place was my career. While my parents were busy building a monument to my brother Ethan's potential, I was quietly building an empire of my own, one spreadsheet and late-night presentation at a time. After graduating with honors from Northwestern, a fact my family barely registered, I landed a job at a mid-sized marketing agency in Chicago. It wasn't glamorous, but it was a proving ground. For 3 years, I was the first one in and the last one out. I volunteered for every project nobody wanted, I learned from every mistake, and I absorbed every piece of knowledge I could about digital strategy. My big break came when my boss left for Apex Creative Solutions, one of the top firms in the country. He took me with him. The pressure was immense, the hours were brutal, but the opportunities were real. When I called my parents to share the news, my father's response was exactly what I expected. I remember his exact words, dripping with dismissiveness. He said, "Advertising, huh? Well, I suppose someone has to do it. I always thought you'd eventually go to law school like your brother." I swallowed the familiar bitterness and just focused on the work. I poured everything I had into it. At Apex, I made it my mission to be undeniable. I wanted my work to speak so loudly that even my family wouldn't be able to ignore it. About a year in, a major skincare company came to us. They wanted to rebrand their entire product line for a younger market, Gen Z and millennials. It was a massive multi-million-dollar account, and my executive creative director, a brilliant and intimidating woman named Teresa Williams, unexpectedly put me on the pitch team. I was a junior member, surrounded by seasoned veterans. When I asked her why, she looked at me over her glasses and said something I'll never forget. She told me, "Your demographic insight report on the last account was brilliant. You understand these younger consumers in a way some of our senior people don't. I need that perspective." That was all the fuel I needed. We won the pitch, and suddenly I was second in command on the biggest account in the agency. For the next 2 years, that campaign was my life. I missed friends' birthdays, I canceled vacations, I lived on coffee and takeout, often sleeping on the office couch for a few hours before starting all over again. I wasn't just doing my job, I was obsessed. I pushed for extensive focus group testing. I personally rewrote copy that didn't feel authentic. Other team members complained about my perfectionism, but Teresa always had my back. I heard her telling them in a meeting, "Clara has a vision for this campaign. Trust her instincts." The launch was a colossal success. The client saw a 37% increase in sales within the first quarter. Industry publications wrote case studies about our approach. It was, without exaggeration, a home run. 4 months later, we were all called into an unexpected company-wide meeting. The CEO, Martin Green, rarely addressed the entire staff, so the conference center was buzzing with rumors. He got straight to the point. He announced, "Thanks to record-breaking performance this quarter, Apex will be distributing profit-sharing bonuses to all employees next month." The room erupted in cheers, but he wasn't finished. He continued, "Additionally, we will be recognizing several team members whose extraordinary contributions made this quarter's success possible." My mentor, Teresa, took the microphone and spoke about the skincare account. And then she said, "But the real architect of this campaign was someone who embodies the future of Apex, Clara Marshall. Would you please join me? My mind went blank. I felt hundreds of pairs of eyes on me as I numbly walked to the front of the room. Teresa highlighted specific, innovative parts of the campaign, crediting me by name for each one. Then Martin, the CEO, returned to the microphone. He shook my hand firmly and said, "Clara represents the kind of talent that drives Apex forward, and we believe in rewarding exceptional performance." He turned to Teresa. "Would you like to share the news?" Teresa smiled warmly. "Clara, in recognition of your contribution to the most successful campaign in Apex history, the board has approved a special performance bonus." She paused for effect. "Of $75,000. $75,000. The number just hung in the air for a second before the room exploded again. It was nearly my entire annual salary. I just stood there, completely frozen, certain I had misheard. Later that afternoon, back at my desk, I held the formal letter confirming the bonus. It was real. My first instinct, that old familiar ache for approval, was to call my parents. Surely this tangible, undeniable proof of success would finally impress them. I picked up my phone. Then I put it down again. A memory hit me, sharp and clear, from just the month before. I had tried to tell my father about a smaller industry award I'd won. He interrupted me mid-sentence to take a call from Ethan. After he hung up, he'd completely forgotten what I was talking about. When I tried again later, he just waved his hand dismissively. He said, "That advertising stuff is fine for now, Clara. But when are you going to do something substantial with your career?" Substantial. The word echoed in my head as I stared at the letter confirming a bonus larger than what many people make in a year. Sharing this news wouldn't bring pride. It would just bring more pain. They'd either minimize it, question it, or worse, suddenly show a keen interest in my finances after years of treating my career like a child's hobby. And in that moment, I made a decision. This achievement, it was mine alone. It wasn't for them. It wasn't for their approval. It was the result of every late night, every missed social event, every sacrifice they never saw and wouldn't have understood. That night, my best friend Jordan came over and we celebrated. She screamed, she jumped around my apartment, she insisted we order the expensive champagne. As we toasted, she asked the inevitable question. "So, what are you going to do with all that money?" I smiled, feeling a lightness I hadn't felt in years. "I'm not sure yet," I said. "But whatever it is, it's going to be just for me." I had no idea then how true those words would become. They still thought I was the quiet daughter, just scraping by with her little marketing job. They had no idea I'd just been handed the key to my own liberation. They had no idea their invisible daughter was about to become a force they couldn't ignore. There's a certain kind of quiet that comes before a storm. It's a heavy, unnatural stillness in the air, a feeling that the world is holding its breath. That's what the weeks leading up to my 31st birthday felt like. The family group chat, which usually had a slow trickle of messages, was suddenly buzzing 24/7, but none of it was for me. It was all about Ethan. My brother, after 10 years with his law firm, was finally being made a junior partner. To my father, this wasn't just a promotion. It was the proudest moment of his life, a validation of his own legacy. To my mother, it was an occasion that demanded a celebration of epic proportions. The chat was a relentless flood of party planning. What kind of champagne should they serve? Should the catering be French or Italian? My mother sent dozens of messages debating menu options, asking for input on decorations, and coordinating travel arrangements for relatives flying in from across the country. The party itself was scheduled for 3 weeks after my birthday, but the planning consumed every ounce of my family's attention. My presence in these conversations was purely functional. "Clara, can you look up a good florist near the venue?" "Clara, your Aunt Julia is flying in. You'll need to pick her up from the airport." I was the family's unpaid personal assistant, the logistics coordinator for a party celebrating the man who had overshadowed my entire existence. I started getting strange calls. My dad called me one afternoon, which was unusual in itself. He didn't ask about my work or my life. Instead, it was a weirdly specific series of questions about my finances. He asked, "That apartment of yours in Chicago, the rent must be pretty steep, right? You're managing okay?" I told him I was fine. He pressed on. "Are you saving anything? It's important to have a nest egg, Clara." It felt less like fatherly concern and more like an interrogation, like he was trying to build a case against me, but I couldn't figure out what the crime was. There was a feeling in the pit of my stomach, a deep, cold sense of dread. My 31st birthday was approaching, and I knew it was going to be swallowed by the black hole of Ethan's promotion party. It had happened every year before, but this time felt different. This time, the silence around my own milestone was deafening. After last year's forgotten birthday, which ended with a 2-day late text from my mom, I had made a decision, a quiet vow to myself. This year, I wouldn't remind them. I wouldn't drop hints. I would say absolutely nothing and just see what happened. I wanted to know, once and for all, if I was truly invisible. The morning of my birthday arrived. It was a perfect spring Tuesday. Sunlight streamed through my bedroom windows. I checked my phone. There were texts from my friend Jordan, a few other friends, a dozen emails from work, and a handful of birthday notifications from retailers offering me a free coffee or 10% off. But from my family, there was nothing. Not a text, not a missed call, not even the half-hearted, pre-written message my mother usually remembered to send by mid-afternoon. Nothing. The silence was my answer. I had taken the day off work, a small act of rebellion. I wasn't going to sit around waiting for a call that would never come. I showered, put on my favorite outfit, and walked to a little French cafe near my apartment. I ordered myself an extravagant breakfast of croissants, fresh fruit, and the best coffee they had. As I sat by the window watching the world go by, I did something I'd been doing casually for months. I scrolled through real estate listings on my phone. Home ownership had always felt like a distant dream, something for my future self. But my unexpected bonus had changed the equation. The $75,000 sitting in my savings account wasn't just money, it was a possibility. It was power. Initially, I had planned to simply invest it, to be sensible and responsible, just as I'd always been. But as I sipped my coffee, a different idea began to take shape. An idea that felt dangerous and exciting and necessary. And then I saw it. A listing that made my heart stop. A lakefront cottage, just 2 hours from Chicago, in a small Michigan town known for its scenic beauty. It was a charming 3-bedroom home with solid bones, a huge deck overlooking the water, and best of all, a price that made the bonus a perfect, substantial down payment. I felt a pull so strong it was almost physical. This wasn't just a house, it was a sanctuary. It was an escape. On a whim, a crazy, reckless whim, I called the listing agent, half expecting to leave a voicemail. To my surprise, a woman named Patricia answered immediately. 3 hours later, I was sitting across from her at another cafe, my extravagant breakfast a distant memory. She spread photos and sales data across the table. With every picture she showed me, with every detail she shared about the peaceful community, a feeling of certainty grew inside me. This was it. This was what I needed. By late afternoon, I was back in my apartment, my laptop open for a detailed virtual tour of the property. The agent on site walked through every room, opening closets, and showing the views from every window. The more I saw, the more I could picture myself there. Coffee on the deck at sunrise, reading by the stone fireplace in the evening. This house represented everything my family had never given me. Recognition of my worth, a space that was entirely mine, a celebration of my achievements that no one could diminish or forget. I knew the financially prudent choice would be to wait, to research more, to see it in person. But something deeper was driving me. This wasn't a financial decision anymore. It was an emotional one. With a sudden, stunning clarity, I knew exactly what I wanted to do. As I was preparing the paperwork to make an offer, my phone rang. My mother's name flashed on the screen, and for a stupid, hopeful second, my heart leaped. Maybe she remembered. "Clara, darling," she said, her voice bright and completely oblivious. "I'm looking at gifts for Ethan, and I need your help. Your father and I have decided to get him an Omega Speedmaster to celebrate the partnership. It's a real investment in his career." I was silent, the hope inside me shriveling and dying. My hands were literally hovering over the documents that would change my entire life, and she was calling about a watch. "We're all going to chip in," she continued, breezing right past my silence. "It'll be about $500 from each of us. Can you transfer the money to me by the end of the week? I want to order it soon so we can get it engraved." $500. On my birthday, my mother called not to celebrate me, but to bill me for my brother's luxury gift. The irony was so cruel it was almost comical. I had $75,000 in the bank, a secret they could never imagine, and they were calling to ask for a tiny fraction of the income they'd always dismissed, for the son they worshipped. A strange calm washed over me. "Yes, Mom," I said, my voice terrifyingly even, betraying nothing. "I'll transfer it." "Wonderful, darling. You're always so reliable," she said absently. "Oh, and I'll send you a list of a few party decorations I need you to pick up on your way home from work sometime this week." She hung up. I just sat there for a long moment, staring at the offer documents in front of me. The lump in my throat wasn't sadness anymore. It was a cold, hard knot of fury. That phone call was the final confirmation. I wasn't just forgotten, I was actively being used. I was a tool, an ATM, a personal assistant for the ongoing coronation of King Ethan. With a resolve that felt like it was forged in steel, I finished filling out the paperwork. My fingers didn't even tremble as I electronically signed the offer for the $340,000 house. The moment I clicked submit, a powerful wave of emotion crashed over me. It was pure, unfiltered liberation. This wasn't a gift I was giving myself anymore. This was a declaration of independence. And right at that moment, I don't even know what word to use for what I was feeling. If you're feeling the same rage I am right now, help me out and drop one word in the comments to describe this family's actions. Because instead of breaking down, that rage turned into something else. Something cold and clear and powerful. It was the fuel I never knew I needed. After hitting submit on the offer for the lake house, I didn't feel anxiety or buyer's remorse. I felt nothing at all for a few minutes, just a strange, hollow calm. The 31 years of quiet desperation, of hoping and wishing and begging for a scrap of recognition, it all just evaporated. It was like a fever had finally broken. I sat there in my quiet Chicago apartment, the glow of the laptop screen illuminating my face, and I had a moment of absolute chilling clarity. It wasn't just that they had forgotten my birthday, it was that they would always forget. They would always choose Ethan. They would always see me as secondary, an afterthought, a supporting character in a story that was never about me. And in that moment, I wasn't sad. The sadness had been burned away, leaving something harder and more resolute in its place. The thought that echoed in my mind was simple and final. Enough. There would be no next time. They are never going to change. For my entire life, I had been playing a game I was never meant to win. So, I decided to stop playing. I decided to flip the board over. The week that followed was a blur of methodical, silent action. Patricia, my real estate agent, called the next day with shocking news. The sellers had accepted my offer without a counteroffer. They wanted a quick closing. This was happening. Instead of panicking, I felt a surge of cold, focused energy. The pain of 31 years had finally crystallized into a single, diamond-hard purpose: freedom, and I was going to secure it piece by piece, in secret. I didn't tell my family. I didn't tell anyone except my best friend Jordan. I took a personal day from work and met with a mortgage broker Patricia recommended. I walked into his downtown office with a binder full of documents: my income verification, the bonus letter from Apex, bank statements, and credit reports. I was an open book, but only to the people who could help me build my new life. The broker, Michael, looked over my paperwork, his eyebrows raising slightly. He looked at me and said, "Your financial position is excellent, Clara. Perfect credit score, low debt-to-income ratio, substantial down payment. This should be a very straightforward approval." Every word he said was a validation, a confirmation of the life I had built for myself while my family wasn't looking. The mortgage process moved at lightning speed. The inspection revealed only minor issues, which the sellers quickly agreed to fix. I spent my evenings not on the phone with my family, listening to endless details about Ethan's party, but on my laptop, researching property laws, homeowners insurance, and local utility companies for my new town in Michigan. I was building my fortress, brick by silent brick. Exactly 3 weeks after my birthday, one day before Ethan's massive promotion party, I signed the final closing papers. I held the keys to my own house in my hand. The weight of them felt real, solid. They were the keys to my own kingdom. The timing felt like poetry. That weekend, I was supposed to drive to my parents' house for the pre-party family dinner. Instead, I drove in the opposite direction, toward Michigan. I called my mother the evening before with a calm, believable lie about a work emergency. She was disappointed, but her disappointment was shallow, quickly replaced by a checklist of last-minute party tasks for me. Before hanging up, she said, "Well, you'll still make it to the party tomorrow, right? Ethan would be devastated if you missed his big day." I promised to do my best, knowing I had no intention of going. For once, my milestone was going to take precedence. The next 6 weeks were a secret double life. I spent my weekdays being the diligent marketing director in Chicago, but every Friday evening, I would drive the 2 hours to the lake house and spend my weekends transforming it. I painted the walls, I assembled furniture, I planted flowers in window boxes. I learned about the close-knit lakeside community from my wonderful new neighbors. I was creating a sanctuary, a place that was a reflection of me, not of my family's expectations. During this time, I ignored most calls from my parents. When I did answer, I kept my excuses brief and vague. Work was just so demanding. I was swamped. They accepted it without question, because in their minds, my little marketing job was just a placeholder, a trivial pursuit compared to Ethan's monumental career. Finally, after 6 weeks of hard work, the house was done. It was perfect. It was mine. That Sunday morning, sitting on my private dock with a cup of coffee, watching the sun glitter on the lake, I felt a surge of pride so intense it almost hurt. On impulse, I took out my phone. I captured the scene: the morning light through the trees, the colorful Adirondack chairs on the deck, the serene view from my bedroom window. I took a few shots of the interior, showcasing the cozy fireplace and the bookshelves filled with my favorite novels. Without overthinking it, I opened Instagram. I created a casual post, just a few of the best photos, with a simple caption: "Weekend vibes, nothing beats lake life." I hesitated for a second, then hit share. It wasn't until early that evening, as I was packing up to drive back to Chicago, that I checked my phone again, and the storm broke. The notifications had exploded, dozens of likes and comments from friends, and then I saw them. Comments from my mother, my father, and my brother. First came my mother's confused query, then my father's demanding, accusatory tone, then Ethan's sneering remark about me wasting money while he was focused on his career. The assumptions, the condescension, the complete inability to imagine me as a successful, independent adult. It was all there, in black and white, for the world to see. The next morning at work, the barrage continued. Texts, missed calls. I ignored them all. I was trying to focus on a presentation, trying to maintain the professional composure I had fought so hard to build, when my phone buzzed with a notification. It was a voicemail, from Ethan. Against my better judgment, my finger hovered over the play button. A morbid curiosity, a need to know just how bad it could get, took over. I pressed play. His voice filled my ear, not just annoyed, but cold, dripping with a kind of aristocratic disdain that he must have learned from our father. "Sid," he began, skipping any form of greeting. His use of my old childhood nickname was a deliberate power play, a way to remind me of my place. "I don't know what kind of game you're trying to play, but it's not funny. Mom and Dad are freaking out, and frankly, so am I. What do you think you're doing? Posting those pictures 1 week before my big party?" He paused, and I could hear the sharp, impatient exhale of his breath. It was the sound of a man who had never been denied anything in his life. "All of the focus needs to be on this. This is the culmination of 10 years of my hard work, and you decide now is the perfect time to pull some cheap, attention-seeking stunt? Are you deliberately trying to overshadow my achievement?" The accusation hung in the air, so outrageous, so completely disconnected from reality, that for a second, I couldn't breathe. A hot surge of rage, purer and more potent than any I had ever felt, washed over me. It wasn't just that I was forgotten. Now I was a saboteur. I was the villain in the story of his heroic success. His voice continued, somehow becoming even more condescending. "Look," he said, like he was explaining something to a particularly slow child. "Whatever financial mess you've gotten yourself into, whether you rented that place with a credit card or whatever, you need to clean it up. Now. Dad is not going to be happy about having to bail you out for your impulsive decisions. Grow up, Clara. Not everything is about you." He hung up. I sat there at my desk, in the middle of my successful, high-powered office, a place where I was respected and valued, and I felt the floor drop out from under me. I was clutching my phone so hard my knuckles were white. The unfairness of it was suffocating. He didn't just assume incompetence, he assumed malice. He, the golden boy, whose entire life had been subsidized by our parents, was lecturing me, the self-made woman, about financial responsibility. He, whose every minor victory I had been forced to celebrate, was now accusing me of trying to steal his spotlight. That accusation, that casual, cruel dismissal of my entire life's work, it was worse than being forgotten. It was a direct, calculated insult to my very existence. That was the moment the last shred of hope died. The last flicker of the little girl who just wanted her family to be proud of her was extinguished. And in its place, something new was born. Something cold and sharp and unbreakable. Just before 5 o'clock, the group text from my mother arrived. The summons. "Family dinner this Thursday at 7. No excuses, Clara. We need to discuss several things as a family." I looked at the message, and for the first time, I didn't feel dread. I didn't feel fear. I felt a strange, thrilling sense of anticipation. I knew then that the dinner on Thursday wasn't going to be a discussion. It was going to be a reckoning. And I was no longer the one on trial. The 3 days leading up to the Thursday dinner were strangely quiet. The initial flurry of angry texts and accusatory calls stopped. An ominous silence fell. I knew what it meant. They were preparing. They were aligning their stories, sharpening their arguments, getting ready to present a unified front. They thought they were preparing an ambush. They had no idea they were walking into one. Thursday evening arrived with a spring thunderstorm that perfectly matched the atmosphere. As I drove to my parents' house, the same house where I had always felt small and insignificant, something inside me felt different. For the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of their disapproval. I had built something they couldn't diminish, achieved something they couldn't ignore. The power dynamic had shifted, and they just didn't know it yet. I arrived precisely at 7, parking my reliable Honda behind Ethan's gleaming BMW in the circular driveway. I took a deep breath, walked up to the grand front door, and instead of using my key, I rang the doorbell. It was a small thing, but it was intentional. I was no longer the daughter who could be summoned. I was a guest in their home, a visitor. My mother opened the door, her face a carefully constructed mask of neutrality. "Clara, come in. Everyone's in the living room." The air inside was thick with tension. My father stood by the fireplace, a glass of whiskey in his hand, looking every bit the powerful attorney. Ethan was slouched in an armchair, scrolling through his phone, the picture of casual arrogance. They both looked up as I entered, their expressions mirroring my mother's forced composure. This was their courtroom, and I was the one on trial. My father offered me a drink, his tone clipped and formal. "White wine, please," I replied, my voice steady. I took a seat on the sofa, deliberately choosing the center spot. I would not be pushed to the margins tonight. We engaged in painfully stilted small talk over appetizers, the weather, a charity gala that my mother was helping organize. No one mentioned the lake house, no one mentioned the Instagram post. But it was there, hanging in the air between us, an uninvited guest at its own funeral. It wasn't until we were all seated at the polished mahogany dining room table, plates of my mother's signature roast beef placed before us, that my father finally made his move. He cleared his throat, placed his fork and knife down with deliberate precision, and fixed me with his lawyer's stare. The cross-examination was about to begin. "So, Clara," he began, his voice dripping with condescension, "would you care to explain the photos you posted? Whose property is that?" This was the moment. The moment the old me would have stammered, apologized, and tried to explain herself. But the old me wasn't there anymore. I took a slow sip of my wine, met his gaze directly across the table, and let the silence hang for a beat too long. Then I answered, "It's mine. I bought it last month." You could have heard a pin drop. The only sound was the clatter of Ethan's fork as it fell from his hand onto his plate. My mother let out a short, nervous laugh, a sound of pure disbelief. "That's not possible, darling," she said, as if I were a child telling a tall tale. "Houses like that cost hundreds of thousands of dollars." "Yes, they do," I agreed calmly, turning to look at her. "This one cost $350,000. I put $80,000 down and financed the rest." Ethan finally spoke, his voice a mixture of shock and contempt. "Where would you get $80,000 for a down payment? That's ridiculous." I turned my calm, steady gaze to him. All those years of being talked over, of being dismissed, of being the quiet one in the corner, they all culminated in this moment of absolute stillness. "I received a performance bonus at work," I said, my voice even and clear, "for leading the most successful campaign in the company's history." My father frowned, the mask of composure finally cracking. He set his own knife down, the sound sharp in the silent room. "You never mentioned any bonus, or any significant campaign for that matter." His tone was accusatory, as if my success was a betrayal, a secret I had deliberately kept from him. And this is where I dropped the first bomb. "No, I didn't," I acknowledged, letting the words settle. I looked from my father to my mother, to my brother, making eye contact with each of them. "Just like none of you mentioned my birthday 6 weeks ago." The reference hit them like a physical blow. Another awkward, heavy silence fell, this one filled with guilt. My mother was the first to break it, her voice defensive and flustered. "Clara, we've been incredibly busy with Ethan's partnership celebrations. You know that. These are once-in-a-lifetime events that require all of our attention." "They always are," I replied softly, but my voice carried across the table like a whip. "Every year, there's some reason my birthday isn't worth remembering, while Kyle's accomplishments merit weeks of non-stop celebration." Ethan shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "That's not fair, Sid. Nobody deliberately forgot." "Didn't they?" I asked, my voice gaining strength. "When was the last time any of you remembered my birthday without me reminding you? When was the last time you planned even a simple dinner to celebrate me, while Ethan gets yacht parties and celebrity chefs?" My father's expression hardened, his patience gone. This emotional territory was uncomfortable for him. He tried to steer the conversation back to something he could control, money and logic. "This isn't about birthdays," he snapped, his voice rising. "This is about making major financial decisions without consulting your family." Purchasing real estate is a serious business that requires experience and knowledge you simply don't have. And here came the second bomb. I have both, I countered, my voice cutting through his anger like glass. I researched thoroughly. I worked with reputable professionals, including a financial advisor and a mortgage broker. I made a sound investment. My finances, Dad, are excellent. My credit is perfect. And the property is already appreciating. I didn't need your experience because I have my own. The idea that I, his quiet, unserious daughter, could handle such a complex transaction without his guidance was so foreign to him that it left him momentarily speechless. My mother pressed on, her voice filled with genuine, bewildered confusion. This was the question she couldn't wrap her head around. But why wouldn't you tell us? We're your family. We should know about important developments in your life. Her questions struck at the very heart of our entire broken dynamic. And for the first time in my adult life, I didn't soften my response to protect their feelings. I didn't make excuses. I didn't let them off the hook. I delivered the third and most devastating bomb of the night. Because, I said, my voice dropping to an intense, quiet register that forced them all to lean in. You have never shown any interest in the important developments in my life. Not really. I looked directly at my mother. My academic achievements, my career milestones, my personal celebrations, they have always been afterthoughts, if they're acknowledged at all. Why would I share my greatest success with people who have consistently devalued every other one? That's absurd, my father scoffed, finding his voice again. We've always supported both our children equally. And then I laughed. It wasn't a happy sound. It was bitter and sharp, and it startled all of them. Equally? Dad, that is simply not true, and you know it. Calmly but firmly, I laid out the case against them, not as a victim, but as a prosecutor. I recounted the forgotten 16th birthday when they took Ethan to Stanford, my 21st, which was swallowed by his engagement party. I reminded them of the dismissive comments about my career. I reminded my mother of her phone call on my 31st birthday, asking for $500 for Ethan's watch. I even mentioned Ethan's voicemail, accusing me of trying to steal his spotlight. With every example, I could see the color draining from their faces. The carefully constructed reality they had lived in for 3 decades was crumbling around them, right there at the dinner table. Every milestone in my life, I continued, my voice now shaking with the force of 31 years of suppressed emotion, has been overshadowed by something involving Ethan. Every accomplishment has been minimized or ignored. So when I received a tangible, undeniable recognition at work in the form of a substantial bonus, I decided to use it for something that would bring me joy. Without seeking approval, I absolutely knew, would never come. Ethan, who had been uncharacteristically silent, finally spoke, his voice small. I had no idea you felt this way, Sid. My mother's eyes were filled with tears. We never meant to make you feel less important, Clara. We love you just as much as Ethan. I believe you think that's true, I replied, and the honesty of it seemed to stun her more than anything else. But your actions have consistently shown otherwise. I pushed my chair back and stood up, placing my napkin beside my barely touched dinner. The charade was over. I'm not interested in your approval of my purchase, I stated, my voice now clear and strong. I'm not interested in your belated concern about my birthday or my feelings. What I am interested in is finally being recognized as an independent adult who has built a successful life despite, not because of, my family's support. My father rose as well, his face flushed with anger. You're being dramatic and ungrateful. No, I countered, looking him straight in the eye. I'm being honest, perhaps for the very first time. And if honesty seems dramatic to you, that says more about our family dynamic than it does about me. I gathered my purse and my jacket. The air was electric. I had said the unsayable. I had broken the unspoken rules that had governed our family for my entire life. I won't be attending the remainder of Ethan's partnership celebrations, I announced to the stunned room. I have a lake house to enjoy. and a life to live, one that doesn't revolve around being a supporting character in the Ethan show. I turned and walked out of the dining room, leaving them there in the wreckage of their perfect family dinner. I could feel their eyes on my back, but I didn't look back. I didn't stop until I was outside, in the cool, clean air of the storm that had just passed. And as I walked to my car, I wasn't crying. I was smiling. The war wasn't over, but the most important battle had just been won. The drive back to my apartment should have been terrible. It should have been filled with anxiety and regret, but instead, as I drove through the rain-slicked streets of Chicago, I experienced a profound sense of relief. It felt like I had just walked out of a prison I didn't even know I was in. For years, I had carried the weight of their neglect, twisting myself into smaller and smaller shapes, hoping that if I made myself less needy, less visible, they might finally see me. Laying down that burden felt like flying. I didn't even stop at my apartment. I kept driving. It was a Thursday night, and I had work the next day, but suddenly nothing seemed more important than waking up in the space I had created for myself. I drove through the night, the rain giving way to clear skies dotted with stars, and arrived at the lake house just before dawn. As I stood on my deck, watching the first light of morning paint the lake in shades of pink and gold, I felt a lifetime of pent-up emotions finally finding release. My phone had been buzzing non-stop since I'd left their house, but I hadn't looked at it, not once. I turned it off and left it inside. For the next 24 hours, I was going to be unreachable. I was going to be free. That Friday, I took the day for myself. I walked along the shoreline. I read a book. I did absolutely nothing of consequence, and it was the most productive day I'd had in years. It wasn't until Friday evening, sitting by my fireplace with a glass of wine, that I finally felt ready to face the aftermath. I turned my phone back on. It was a digital explosion. 22 missed calls, 37 text messages. My screen lit up like a Christmas tree from hell. I could almost feel the panic radiating through the phone. Their panic wasn't for me, of course. It is a concern for my well-being. It was the raw, primal panic of people who had just had their entire reality ripped out from under them. It was the panic of losing control. I started with the text messages, a chronological documentation of their descent into chaos. The first few were from my mother, sent just minutes after I had walked out. They started with disbelief. "Clara, this isn't funny. Come back inside and let's talk about this like adults." Followed by, "What are you talking about, a bonus? You need to explain yourself." Then came the shock, as the reality of my words began to sink in. My father chimed in, his texts blunt and demanding. "Where did you get this money? I want a full accounting, now." And another, "You did not buy a house without my consultation. That is financially irresponsible." Then, the panic truly set in. Ethan, probably after my parents filled him in on the details he'd missed while in his state of shock, began his assault. "A $75,000 bonus? You're lying." Followed quickly by, "If you have that kind of money, why haven't you been contributing more to the family?" The sheer audacity of that question almost made me laugh out loud. The messages got more and more frantic as the hours passed. They were a jumbled mess of accusations, demands, and attempts at emotional manipulation. I scrolled through them, feeling strangely detached, like I was reading the script of a particularly dysfunctional play. And then I moved on to the voicemails. This was where their true natures were laid bare. The first was from my mother. She was crying. It was the sound that had always worked on me before, the sound that could make me feel guilty for things I hadn't even done. "Clara, honey, please," she sobbed. "I don't know what we did to make you so angry, but we can fix this. You're tearing this family apart. How could you do this to us, after everything we've done for you?" Everything they'd done for me. The words hung there empty and meaningless. Her tears weren't for my pain. They were for the disruption of her perfect family image. I was no longer playing my part, and it was ruining her production. The next voicemail was from my father. His tone was completely different. He wasn't yelling, he was trying to sound reasonable, like the calm, rational lawyer closing an argument. "Clara," he said, his voice smooth and measured. "I think there has been a significant misunderstanding. We have always been proud of you. Perhaps we haven't always shown it in the way you would have liked, but our support has always been there. Buying property is a major step. There are tax implications, maintenance costs you haven't considered. All I want to do is help you protect your investment." Protect my investment. It wasn't an apology. It was an attempt to regain control, to reinsert himself as the knowledgeable patriarch who knew best. He wasn't acknowledging my success. He was trying to manage it. And finally, there was the voicemail from Ethan. It had been left late at night, and I could almost hear the clinking of ice in a glass in the background. His voice was slurred, filled with a venomous rage that he usually kept hidden beneath a veneer of charm. "You think you're so clever, don't you, Sid?" he spat, the old nickname now a clear insult. "You couldn't stand it, could you? You couldn't stand that for once. Something was about me. You had to pull this pathetic, dramatic stunt to make yourself the center of attention. You've ruined everything. My partners were supposed to come to that dinner. Now everyone is talking about your little performance. You are the most selfish, ungrateful person I have ever known. You didn't earn that money. You got lucky. And you've just thrown it all away on some stupid house to spite us." Selfish. Ungrateful. It was their family anthem, and I was always the one they sang it about. They weren't just angry that I had succeeded. They were angry that I had succeeded without their permission. They were angry that my success story didn't have their names in the credits. I sat there in the quiet of my new home, the crackling of the fire the only sound. I listened to their words, their accusations, their manipulations, and I felt nothing. The part of me that would have been crushed by their disapproval was gone. The part of me that would have scrambled to apologize and make things right had vanished. Their words couldn't hurt me anymore, because I had finally stopped believing them. Their version of reality was no longer my own. I put my phone down on the table. For years, my silence had been a sign of submission. It was the silence of a daughter who knew her voice didn't matter. But this silence, this was different. This was the silence of a queen in her castle, pulling up the drawbridge. It was the silence of a woman who was finally, completely, in control of her own story. And I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that they could scream and rage and cry all they wanted outside the walls. But they were never getting back in. Not on their terms, not ever again. The weekend at the lake house was a sanctuary. The silence that once would have felt like punishment now felt like a gift. But I knew it couldn't last forever. I had to go back to Chicago, back to my job, back to the life I had built. And I knew they would be waiting. The barrage of texts and calls had stopped abruptly on Saturday morning, and that worried me more than the noise had. It meant they were regrouping. It meant they were planning their next move. Their move came on Monday evening. I had just gotten home from a long day at work, kicked off my shoes, and was about to make dinner when the intercom in my apartment building buzzed. I wasn't expecting anyone. I pressed the button. "Yes? Clara? It's us. Let us in." It was my mother's voice, strained and thin through the speaker. "Us!" My stomach tightened. I walked over to the window that overlooked the street and peered down. My father's silver Mercedes was parked right in front of my building. They had driven all the way into the city, unannounced. This was an escalation. This was an ambush, round two. The old me would have buzzed them in immediately. The old me would have apologized for not being prepared, would have offered them a drink, and would have braced herself for the lecture that was sure to follow. But the old me was gone. I took a deep breath, my hand steady on the intercom button. "I'm not having visitors tonight," I said, my voice clear and firm. There was a sputtering on the other end. "Don't be ridiculous, Clara. This is important. We need to talk." It was my father's voice now, booming and authoritative, Even through the tinny speaker, he wasn't asking, he was commanding. No, I said. Just one word. It was probably the first time in my life I had said that word to him without an excuse or an apology attached. We don't need to talk right now. I'm not ready to talk. Clara Elizabeth, you open this door right now, he thundered. And that's when I knew I had to do it. I had to draw the line, not in the sand, but in solid concrete. I am not going to discuss this through an intercom, I said, my voice as cold as steel. You should not have come here unannounced. When I am ready to have a conversation, I will be the one to initiate it. Now, I suggest you leave. I won't be answering again. I took my finger off the button. A few seconds later, the buzzer blared again, long and angry. I ignored it. It buzzed again. I walked away from the wall, my heart pounding in my chest, a mixture of terror and exhilarating freedom. They buzzed one more time and then silence. I looked out the window again. After a few minutes of what I imagined was a furious, frustrated conversation, they got back in their car and drove away. I had done it. I had held the line. For the first time in my life, I hadn't caved. I had chosen myself over their demands. This was a massive moment. If you support this powerful decision she made, drop a flexing bicep emoji in the comments to send her some strength for the journey ahead, because that strength, even the idea of it, was exactly what I needed to start rebuilding my world. The first thing I did after they left was block their numbers. And Ethan's. Not forever, maybe, but for now, I needed space. I needed to breathe air that wasn't filled with their expectations and their disappointment. I needed to remember who I was when I wasn't their daughter or their sister. The silence that followed was glorious. It was the sound of my own thoughts, the sound of my own life, finally taking center stage. The following weekend, my best friend Jordan drove out to the lake house for the first time. She walked through the door with a bottle of expensive champagne in one hand and a housewarming gift in the other. Her jaw literally dropped as she looked around. Clara, she whispered, walking through the living room and out onto the deck. This place it's absolutely you. She wasn't just talking about the paint colors or the furniture. She saw more than that. She saw the story. Later that night, as we sat on the deck under a blanket of stars, sipping champagne, she raised her glass. You know, she said, her voice full of emotion, they spent your whole life throwing bricks at you. Disappointment, neglect, criticism. And you took every single one of those bricks, and you built yourself a castle. Her words meant more to me than any apology from my family ever could. Because she saw me. She had always seen me. She was the family I had chosen. And it wasn't just her. A new kind of family was starting to form around me in this new place. The day I first arrived, a silver-haired woman had approached from the neighboring property, carrying a covered dish. Hello there, she'd called out cheerfully. You must be the new owner. I'm Margaret. Welcome to the neighborhood. That evening, she and her husband, James, insisted I join them for dinner. They shared stories about the community, gave me tips on the best local wineries, and made me feel more welcome in 3 hours than my own family had in 3 decades. This was my new reality. A world where kindness wasn't conditional. A world where my presence was a welcome addition, not a tolerated inconvenience. Even at work, things felt different. My success on the skincare campaign hadn't gone unnoticed. My mentor, Teresa, called me into her office the week after the confrontation with my family. She told me she was nominating me for an industry award that recognized emerging leaders in marketing. She looked at me and said, "There's a new confidence in your work, Clara, a boldness. You found your voice, and people are listening." It was true. The confidence I had found in my personal life was bleeding into my professional one. By refusing to be silent at home, I had unlocked a new level of authority at work. I was no longer afraid to push back, to defend my vision, to lead. I was finally integrating the successful, competent woman I was at work with the person I was inside. They were becoming the same. This was my new support system, the family I was building for myself. It wasn't based on blood or obligation. It was based on respect, kindness, and mutual recognition. And it was a foundation so strong, no storm could ever shake it. 6 months have passed since that dinner. It's summer now, and I'm writing this from the deck of my lake house, my real home. I'm working remotely for the week, something my company encouraged after I was promoted to senior director last month. The award Teresa nominated me for, I won it. It's sitting on my mantelpiece, right next to a framed photo of me and Jordan, champagne glasses raised in a toast. This house isn't just a place to live anymore. It's proof. It's a daily, tangible reminder that I am capable, I am successful, and I am worthy of beautiful things, all on my own. The silence from my family didn't last forever, but when the communication started again, the tone was completely different. The power had shifted permanently. I learned through the family grapevine that my declaration of independence had sent shockwaves through their finances. My father, in his anger, had cut Ethan off completely. For the first time in his 35 years of life, my brother had to pay his own rent. He had to learn how to budget. He had to face the consequences of a life lived without a safety net. I also heard my parents had to cancel their long-planned anniversary trip to Europe. It turns out, funding the lifestyle of a grown man is an expensive hobby. Their world, built on the unsteady foundation of favoritism, had started to crumble the moment I refused to be one of its pillars. About 2 months ago, I got a text from a number I didn't recognize. It was Ethan. He asked if we could meet for coffee. No parents. Just us. I was hesitant, but I agreed, choosing a neutral cafe halfway between the city and their suburb. He looked different, tired, humbled. The arrogance was gone. For the first time, he looked me in the eye and apologized. A real apology. He said, "I'm sorry, Sid. I was so caught up in my own world, I never saw what was happening to you. Or maybe, I just chose not to see it, because I benefited from it." It wasn't an excuse. It was a confession. And it was the beginning of something new. Our relationship is still a work in progress, but we're building it now on a new foundation, one of honesty and respect. My parents also reached out, a carefully worded text from my mother, asking to talk when I was ready. I agreed, but on my terms. We met at a restaurant, not their home. It was awkward. It was difficult. There were tears from my mother and defensive justifications from my father. It wasn't a magical resolution, but it was a start. It was the first time they seemed to see me not as Ethan's supportive sister, but as an individual with her own valid feelings. As I sit here now, watching the sunset paint the lake in gold and crimson, I've had a lot of time to reflect. The pain of being overlooked for so long hasn't completely disappeared, but it no longer defines me. I spent my whole life waiting for other people to validate my worth, to throw me a party, to see me. And what I've learned is that waiting is a losing game. True validation doesn't come from others. It comes from within. It comes from creating a life that reflects your own values and brings you your own joy, regardless of who's watching. I spent a lifetime waiting for my family to build a place for me at their table. And I finally realized the most powerful thing I could do was build my own damn house. My story is about a forgotten birthday and a house, but it's really about recognizing your own value when no one else will. It's about being your own hero. Have you ever had to set a difficult boundary with family members who took you for granted? How did you navigate that painful but necessary conversation? Share your own story of strength in the comments below. Let's create a space where we can all learn from each other. And if this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe, because you deserve to be celebrated, even if you're the one who has to throw the party.